house becomes so empty when a loved one leaves. Everything reminds me of him. Every corner holds echoes of the moments we lived together. It's been 4 years since William left this world, but I still, when I wake up in the morning, sometimes reach over to his side of the bed. It's empty, just a crumpled pillow and cool sheets. My name is Violet Price. I'm 67 years old, and I live in a small, cozy house in a quiet neighborhood in Vienna. I have spent 35 years of my life teaching elementary school, teaching children to read, write, and understand this complicated world. William always said I had a special gift for finding a way with children. Maybe that's why our son Edmund grew up to be such an intelligent and kind boy. At least he used to be. After William's death from a heart attack, my life was divided into before and after. For the first year, I just existed, cooking food I couldn't eat, cleaning the house, though there was no mess, watching television, not understanding what was happening on the screen. Edmund often visited me then. He came on weekends with the kids, called almost every day asking how I was doing. His concern was like a lifeline in the ocean of my grief. But gradually, things changed. The visits became less frequent, the calls shorter. At first, I wrote it off to his busyness. Edmund was always ambitious, worked as a programmer in a large company, constantly striving for promotion. Then I realized it wasn't just about work. It was about Meredith, his wife. Meredith Hall Price came into my son's life 6 years ago. She worked as a realtor for a real estate agency specializing in high-end properties. Tall, slender, with impeccably styled brown hair and a manicure that never seemed to deteriorate. The first time Edmund had brought her to our house for dinner, I'd sensed something wrong. The look she gave our modest home said more than any words. How can you live in such simplicity? But I tried. I really tried. Cooked the best meals, wore the prettiest dresses to family gatherings, inquired about her work. Meredith responded with cold politeness, that special form of address when one observes all the rules of propriety, but there's ice behind every word. "Your pie is very homemade, Violet," she said, barely touching the dessert I'd been making all day. "It's nice that you still have all this stuff," she remarked, looking at the collection of porcelain figurines William and I had collected over the years. Each compliment sounded like a veiled criticism. Every glance evaluated and found flaws. I tried not to show how much it hurt me, especially in front of Edmund. He was so happy with her, so proud to have attracted the attention of such an exquisite woman. After the wedding, things only got worse. Meredith made it very clear that I didn't fit into their new life. When Calvin, my first grandson, was born, I was over the moon. But even then, Meredith found ways to alienate me, first with excuses about the baby's regimen, then about his special diet, then about how my old-fashioned parenting methods were inappropriate for the modern world. "Violet, we don't give Calvin sugar," she said when I brought out homemade cookies for my grandson. "Modern research shows it's bad for the developing brain." "These fairy tales are too scary for a toddler," she declared when I read him the children's version of Little Red Riding Hood. There are much more progressive books for children now. The same thing happened again when little Olivia came along. I could only see my grandchildren at strictly designated times, in the presence of Meredith or the babysitter she hired. My gifts to the children were often lost or found to be inappropriate. Edmund didn't seem to notice anything odd, or didn't want to notice. "Mother, you have to understand Meredith has her own ideas about parenting," he would say when I gently tried to discuss the situation. "She reads all the modern psychology books, keeps up with the latest research." I didn't argue. What could I say? That his wife is deliberately alienating me from them? That she looks at me as a relic of the past, unworthy of being around her family? That every time I went to their house I felt like an intruder? Gradually I accepted it and learned to live with it. I was glad for those rare moments when I could be with my grandchildren. Calvin, now 8 years old, is such a smart and inquisitive boy, always asking a million questions. Olivia, a 5-year-old princess with curls inherited from my side of the family, loves it when I tell her fairy tales, the same old-fashioned stories that Meredith considers outdated. After William died, I decided to fill the void in my life with something useful. I started a reading group at the local library for the elderly. We discuss classic literature, modern novels, sometimes even poetry. It helps me not to feel lonely, although the emptiness in my heart doesn't go away. Our group meets every Thursday. There are 10 of us, mostly women my age. But there are two gentlemen, Mr. Patterson, a former professor of English literature, and Mr. Ellington, a widower who joined us after his wife died. We have become something of a family to each other, sharing not only opinions about books but also worldly problems, joys, anxieties. "Violet, you seem distracted today," Eleanor, the most observant of the group, remarked at the last meeting. "Is something wrong?" I shook my head, not wanting to share my family problems. We were discussing Pride and Prejudice, and I was trying to concentrate on Mr. Darcy's character, not think about the last time Meredith had canceled my visit to the grandchildren at the last minute, citing sudden plans. "I just didn't sleep well," I lied. "Let's get back to the book." Eleanor didn't believe me. I could see it in her gaze, but she didn't insist. After the meeting, she stayed late, helping me gather the cups and set up the chairs. "You know, Violet," she said when we were alone, "sometimes it helps just to talk. I'm always ready to listen." I smiled gratefully, but I didn't say anything. How do you explain to someone that your own son is slowly drifting away from you, that his wife is methodically pushing you out of their lives? It would sound like the complaints of a mother-in-law unhappy with her daughter-in-law, the most hackneyed story in the world. The day the call from Edmund came, I was just getting ready for another meeting of the circle. We were to discuss Jane Eyre, and I was rereading my favorite passages, making notes. "Mom, hi." Edmund's voice sounded unusually animated. "I have great news. I've been promoted to head of the department." "Oh, darling, that's wonderful." I was overjoyed. "I'm so proud of you. You've always been so determined." "Meredith is organizing a dinner to celebrate the occasion next Friday at the Azure. You're invited, of course. The Azure is one of the most expensive restaurants in town. I've never been there, but I've heard that only the very wealthy go there." The very name of the place conjured up images of luxury beyond the reach of someone like me. "Edmund, that's so sweet, but, I'm not sure it's my place," I said cautiously. "What do you mean?" There was a note of irritation in his voice. "It's a family celebration, and you're part of the family." "Of course, darling. It's just such an elegant place, I'm not sure I have the right outfit." "Mom," he sounded tired now, "that's not a problem. Wear that blue dress I gave you last Christmas. It'll do just fine." I didn't mention that the dress was left hanging in the closet with the labels on it. It was too fancy, too revealing for a woman my age. Edmund hadn't chosen it himself. I was sure of it. Meredith must have told him what to buy. "All right, dear. What time do you need to be here?" 7 p.m. Meredith's invited some of her colleagues and friends, so there'll be 20 people. 20 people. I felt anxiety rising in my throat. Most of them would probably be like Meredith, confident, sophisticated, with impeccable manners. People who look at people like me with barely concealed condescension. "That sounds impressive," I said, trying to make my voice sound happy. "I'll definitely be there." "Great. And, Mom," he paused. "Meredith wanted me to tell you not to bring those photo albums you usually show. It's a business dinner and she wants it to be, professional." I felt my cheeks flame with resentment. Those albums contained pictures of Edmund from childhood through college, his first day of school, graduation, academic awards. I'd only taken them a couple times, when we'd met at the coffee shop with other relatives. "Of course I understand," I replied, swallowing the lump in my throat. After we said goodbye, I sat with my phone in my hands for a long time, staring at nothing. Something told me that this dinner would be more than just a celebration of Edmund's promotion. It was an opportunity for Meredith to showcase her success, her status, and I was, well, an uncomfortable reminder of her husband's humble origins. I opened my closet and pulled out that blue dress. It was beautiful, but not my style, too tight, with a neckline I would never have chosen on my own. As I hung it on the closet door, I thought I'd have to find some sort of cape or scarf to make myself more comfortable. In the days that followed, I got more and more nervous. Even the book club meeting couldn't distract me completely. My thoughts kept returning to the upcoming dinner, to how Meredith would introduce me to her acquaintances, if at all. I remembered how, at Edmund and Meredith's wedding, she had introduced me to her parents as Edmund's mother, Not by name, not as mother-in-law, just a function, a role. Her own parents were just like her daughter, well-groomed, with perfect smiles and blank eyes. They politely shook my hand and immediately withdrew, finding more interesting interlocutors. Strangely, I knew very little about Meredith's parents. She rarely spoke of them, and when she did, it was always in the context of their accomplishments and status. Her father was some kind of financial consultant, her mother an interior designer. They lived in another state and rarely came to visit. At the wedding, they seemed a bit aloof, even from their own daughter. I remember noticing that Meredith's mother didn't hug her once all evening. The night before dinner, I received a text from Edmund. "Don't forget tomorrow at 7. Meredith says it's best not to take a cab. The restaurant is having trouble parking for them. I'll pick you up at 6:30. This was unexpected. Edmund usually suggested that I call a cab rather than waste time picking me up. Perhaps he sensed my anxiety and wanted to be supportive. The thought warmed my soul a little. That night, I couldn't sleep for a long time. I tossed and turned in bed, imagining how tomorrow's dinner would go. My imagination painted unpleasant scenarios of me saying the wrong thing, Meredith rolling her eyes, her friends exchanging understanding glances. I knew I was being silly after all. It was just dinner. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something unpleasant was waiting for me. Around midnight, I got up, walked to the kitchen, and made myself some chamomile tea. Sitting at the table, I looked out the window at the quiet street lit by street lamps. Somewhere out there, in a big house in an upscale neighborhood, my grandchildren were sleeping. Sometimes I felt as if they lived in another world that I couldn't reach. I remembered the last time I was at their house, Calvin asked me about my childhood. I started telling him about growing up on a small farm, about helping my father with the animals, about playing in the woods with my brothers. He listened, eyes wide, asking questions, and then Meredith came into the room. Calvin, it's time for your piano lesson," she said, without even looking at me. "Say goodbye to Grandma." "But Mom, Grandma tells me about the farm and the animals," he protested. "Some other time," Meredith cut him off. Minus Mr. Lee was waiting, and Calvin left, giving me an apologetic look. I was left sitting alone in their perfect living room, feeling like a stranger. Sighing, I finished my tea and went back to the bedroom. Tomorrow would be a new day, and I needed to get enough sleep to look decent. I couldn't help but think that Meredith might have purposely arranged this dinner at such an expensive place, knowing that I would feel uncomfortable. But I wasn't going to give her that pleasure. I'm going to go with my head held high, be polite and dignified, just like my mother taught me. After all, I'm doing this for Edmund, my son, whom I love more than anything in the world. With these thoughts, I finally fell asleep, though sleep was restless. I dreamed that I was standing in the middle of a great hall full of people in fine clothes, and they were all looking at me and whispering. And I looked down and saw that I was wearing an old housecoat instead of a dressy gown. The morning of the day for dinner was overcast. It was drizzling outside the window, and gray clouds covered the sky as if to portend trouble. I woke up early, though I hadn't been able to sleep much the night before. The thoughts of the evening ahead kept me awake. After breakfast, I decided to do some housework to distract myself. I dusted, went through the books on the shelves, even washed the windows in the living room. Time crawled agonizingly slow, and my anxiety only grew. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I decided to start getting ready. I pulled out of the closet the blue dress Edmund had given me last Christmas. It was still labeled, I'd never worn it. I carefully removed the tags and put it on, and looked in the mirror. It fit just right, too well for clothes I hadn't tried on. Meredith must have known my size, but the neckline, it was deeper than it looked on the rack, and the silhouette emphasized all the parts of my figure I preferred to hide. I was standing in front of the mirror, feeling out of place when it hit me. It was only 3:30 on the clock. I still had time. I quickly took off my dress and called the small atelier near my house, where I had hemmed clothes several times. The owner, Mrs. Willoughby, had always been sympathetic to me. "Mrs. Willoughby? This is Violet Price. I have an urgent request. Would you be able to alter the dress a little today?" "If the alterations are not too complicated, I can," she said. "Bring it in and we'll see." 20 minutes later, I was at the atelier. Mrs. Willoughby examined the dress carefully. "I see," She nodded when I tried it on and explained the problem. The neckline is really too deep for you. But I have an idea. We can insert a thin lace of the same shade of blue here and add the same lace elements on the edge of the sleeves and hem. That sounds wonderful, I exhaled with relief. Do you think you can make it by 5 o'clock? I'll do my best for you, Mrs. Price, she smiled. When I left the studio, I felt much better. Now I could wear my son's gift and still feel comfortable. Meredith would notice the change, of course, but it would be harder to pick on. At 5 o'clock sharp, I was back at the atelier. Mrs. Willoughby handed me the new dress, and I put it on in the fitting room. The dress had been transformed. The thin lace in the same shade of blue softened the deep neckline, and the same lace at the edges of the sleeves and hem gave the dress an elegant look. The silhouette was looser at the waist, but still emphasized the figure where it needed to be. It's a miracle, I exclaimed. It looked even more expensive and sophisticated now. When I got home, I finished my hair and makeup and put on pearl earrings and a thin silver bracelet, gifts from William. At 6:30 sharp, Edmund arrived. He looked elegant in his new dark gray suit. Mother, you look lovely, he said. Is this the dress we gave you? Yes, dear, I smiled. I made some minor alterations to make it fit better. It looks even better than I remembered. He gave me an approving look. Meredith will be glad you're wearing it. On the way, Edmund talked about his promotion and his new responsibilities. I listened, but inside I was growing uneasy. Something about the way he spoke made me think this evening was going to be more difficult than I expected. When we pulled up to the Azure, I was speechless for a moment. The restaurant was housed in an old column mansion surrounded by a manicured garden. At the entrance stood a doorman in livery who opened the doors to luxury cars. Inside the restaurant was even more luxurious. Crystal chandeliers, marble columns, waiters in snow-white gloves. The maitre d' escorted us to a private room where about 15 people were already seated. Meredith stood in the center, surrounded by admiring listeners. She wore an elegant black dress that must have cost more than my entire pension for the year. Seeing us, she approached. At last, she said, kissing Edmund on the cheek. She gave me a brief nod, but I saw her eyes linger on my dress, a look of surprise and slight irritation in her eyes. Violet, I'm glad you could join us. Thank you for the invitation, Meredith. I smiled. This is a very beautiful place. Interesting interpretation of the dress we gave you, she said, eyeing my outfit. I decided to add some lace, I replied calmly. It suits the occasion better, doesn't it? Meredith hesitated for a moment, clearly not expecting that answer. Of course, she said with a strained smile. Let me show you to your seat. I expected to sit next to Edmund, but Meredith led me to the far end of the long table where two older women were already seated. These are Mrs. Lawrence and Mrs. Avery, the mothers of Edmund's colleagues, Meredith introduced me. Ladies, this is Violet Price, my husband's mother, not mother-in-law, not Edmund's mother, but just my husband's mother, as if I was some sort of appendage not deserving of real respect. The women greeted me politely, and I sat down in the designated seat. From here, I could barely see Edmund, who sat at the opposite end of the table next to Meredith and some seemingly important men. A waiter came to our end of the table, offering drinks. I chose a white wine, though I don't usually drink alcohol. But tonight, I needed something to take the edge off. As the hors d'oeuvres were served, I tried to keep up a conversation with my table mates, but my thoughts kept returning to Meredith. She was talking animatedly with the guests at her end of the table, occasionally casting brief glances in my direction. I could see the displeasure in them, as if I'd disrupted her plans by altering her dress. After the hors d'oeuvre, Edmund rose with a glass of champagne in his hand. Everyone fell silent, waiting for him to speak. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight, he began, especially my colleagues and mentors, without whom my promotion would not have been possible. He spoke confidently with a smile, occasionally casting grateful glances at Meredith. And of course, I want to thank my beautiful wife Meredith, he continued, who has always supported me and believed in my success. Meredith smiled and lowered her eyes modestly, but I could see her absorbing every word of praise. I'm also grateful to my mother, Edmund added with a nod in my direction, who taught me hard work and honesty. It was said almost in passing, as if out of politeness. I smiled and raised my glass, but inside I felt a pang of resentment. After the toast, the main courses were served. I barely touched mine, some kind of exquisite fish with sauce. My appetite was gone, and the wine I was sipping began to take effect, making me slightly dizzy. At one point, I noticed Meredith heading in my direction. She stopped behind my chair and whispered in my ear, "Violet, my dear, I see you have decided to improve the dress we so carefully chose for you." "Yes, I've added a little lace," I answered calmly. It was too revealing for a woman of my age. "It was modern," she countered with a strained smile. "It was perfect for the occasion. Why waste money on a makeover?" I felt the color flood my cheeks. Mrs. Lawrence and Mrs. Avery pretended not to hear our conversation, but I could see they were listening intently. "It was an attempt to make myself comfortable," I answered, trying to keep my voice firm. Mrs. Willoughby had done a wonderful job. The dress looks even more expensive now. "Who is Mrs. Willoughby?" Meredith asked with slight contempt. "The owner of the atelier where I sometimes sew clothes," I replied. "She has golden hands." "Oh, the atelier. Of course," she said the word as if it were a dirty word. "Well, whatever you like. Anyway, I'm glad you at least tried to look decent." She returned to her seat, leaving me with my cheeks burning with shame. I took another sip of wine, trying to calm down. "Don't mind me, dear," Mrs. Avery said quietly. "The dress looks beautiful. That lace decoration is a very exquisite detail." I smiled at her gratefully, but I felt a twinge of unease in my heart. Meredith knew exactly what she was doing, embarrassing me by showing her superiority. After the main course, dessert was served, some sort of elaborate chocolate cake with gold flakes. I barely touched it, even though I usually like sweets. The wine did its job. I felt a little better, my anxiety receding into apathy. As the waiters cleared away the dessert plates and began serving coffee, Meredith rose from her seat again and came to our end of the table. "Ladies, let me steal Violet away from you for a moment," she said with a smile. "I want to introduce her to our guests." Mrs. Lawrence and Mrs. Avery nodded, and I rose with some difficulty, feeling dizzy from the wine. Meredith took me under the elbow, a gesture that looked thoughtful from the outside, but her fingers were digging into my arm harder than necessary. "Smile," she hissed, leading me to the other end of the table. "And don't say too much. These people are important to Edmund's career." "I'm not going to say anything unnecessary," I replied, trying to free my hand from her grip. We approached the group of men, Edmund among them. He looked a little worried to see us together. "Gentlemen, may I introduce Edmund's mother, Violet?" Meredith said. "Violet, this is Mr. Nash, the head of the department where Edmund works, and Mr. Christensen, his deputy." The men shook my hand politely. Mr. Nash smiled. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Price. Your son is a valued member of our company." "Thank you," I replied. "I'm very proud of him." "Violet was an elementary school teacher," Meredith put in, as if she were reporting something insignificant. "Retired, of course." "A noble profession," Mr. Christensen nodded. "My mother was a teacher, too." "Violet taught children for almost 40 years, Meredith continued. "Can you imagine what kind of patient work, especially with a salary like that?" I felt Edmund tense. He gave his wife a warning glance, but she pretended not to notice. "Yes, teachers' salaries leave a lot to be desired," Mr. Nash agreed. "But it's one of the most important professions." "Absolutely," Meredith nodded. "It's just a pity it doesn't allow for a decent old age. Isn't it, Violet?" I froze, unable to believe my ears. She was deliberately humiliating me in front of these people, insinuating my modest financial situation. "I'm quite content with my life, Meredith," I said, trying to keep my voice firm. "Money is not the point." "What a noble position," she grinned. "Though, of course, it's easy to say that when you have no choice." Edmund finally intervened. "Meredith, why don't you get your mother some more wine? Her glass is empty." "Of course, dear." She smiled and left. I apologized and headed back to my seat. As I passed the drinks table, I took another glass of wine, even though I realized I'd already had enough. When I returned to my seat, Mrs. Lawrence and Mrs. Avery were gone. I was alone, sipping my wine and watching Meredith, who was showing some pictures on her phone to a group of listeners. At one point, I noticed Meredith heading toward me again. This time she was accompanied by a young woman with bright red hair. Violet, I'd like you to meet Imogen, my new colleague, Meredith said. Imogen, this is Edmund's mother. Pleased to meet you. Imogen smiled. Meredith has told me so much about you. She had? I looked at my sister-in-law in surprise. Only good things, I hope. Oh, of course. Imogen looked a little embarrassed. She told me you were a teacher. Yes, I taught elementary school, I nodded. Imogen has recently moved to our town, Meredith put in. She comes from a very good family, and her father is a prominent lawyer in Boston. Was your husband a teacher too? Imogen asked. No, William worked for a construction company, I answered. He liked his job. He was just a foreman, Meredith said with a slight smile. Very down to earth. I felt the color flood my cheeks. Meredith was deliberately belittling my late husband. William was a wonderful man, I said, trying to remain calm, and a great father. Oh, I'm sure. Meredith put her hand on Imogen's shoulder. Just explaining to Imogen where Edmund's family comes from. She should know who she's dealing with. Imogen looked increasingly uncomfortable. She gave me an apologetic look and mumbled something about needing to talk to someone else. Why are you doing this? I asked Meredith quietly but firmly when Imogen stepped away. Why are you humiliating me in the memory of William? I'm just telling the truth, Violet, she replied with feigned surprise. Didn't you always teach Edmund to be honest? There's a difference between honesty and deliberate humiliation, I countered. You know exactly what you're doing. I stood up, intending to leave, but I accidentally touched my wine glass. The red liquid spilled over the white tablecloth, making an ugly stain. Oh no, I mumbled, trying to blot the wine with a napkin. Meredith noticed what was happening and walked over to the table, her face contorted with rage. What have you done? She hissed. Do you have any idea how much that tablecloth cost? I didn't mean to, I began, but she interrupted me. Of course you didn't mean it. Her voice grew louder, attracting the attention of the guests. You never do anything on purpose, do you? You just accidentally ruin everything you touch. Meredith, please. I looked around, noticing that people were looking in our direction. I'll pay for the tablecloth. She laughed a sharp, unpleasant laugh. With what? Your teacher's pension? Don't be ridiculous. By now, all the chatter in the room had died down, and all eyes were on us. Meredith, what's going on? Edmund asked, coming over to us. What's going on? She exclaimed, pointing at the tablecloth. Your mother ruined a tablecloth that's worth more than all of her possessions combined. It was just an accident, Edmund tried to reassure her. An accident? Meredith raised her voice even more. People like her shouldn't be in places like this. They don't know how to behave. There was dead silence. I stood there, stunned, feeling the stares of everyone present. Meredith! Edmund's voice shook with restrained anger. You're out of line. But she wasn't listening anymore. She turned to me and said loudly and clearly so that everyone could hear, A beggar like you doesn't belong here, and pointed to the door. I felt the blood drain from my face. I'd never been so humiliated in my life. In complete silence, I rose slowly, squared my shoulders, and looked straight into Meredith's eyes. Okay, I said calmly, but everyone needs to know that you... I didn't finish my sentence, staring into Meredith's furious face. In that moment, it was as if time stood still, and I went back in my mind 3 months to when I learned something that changed the way I felt about my sister-in-law forever. It happened at the end of March. Spring was just beginning, but the day was surprisingly warm. I was on my way to the Morning Dew Cafe to meet Pearl Thornton, an old friend of mine from college. Pearl had moved to another state almost 40 years ago, but we kept in touch through letters and, in recent years, occasional phone calls. Now she came to Vienne to visit her younger sister and suggested we meet. I arrived at the cafe a little before the appointed time. It was small, cozy, with floral prints on the walls and soft sofas. I chose a table by the window and ordered tea, waiting for my friend. Pearl showed up at exactly the right time. She hadn't changed much since I'd last seen her 5 years ago. The same slender figure, the same lively brown eyes, though her hair had turned gray. We hugged and she sat down across from me. Violet, you look beautiful, Pearl smiled. How are you? Little by little, thank you, I sighed. It's been hard since William's death, but time heals. I know, darling. When my Robert left, I thought life was over. But gradually you find new reasons to wake up in the morning. We talked about our lives for almost an hour. She talked about her grandchildren, her community center classes. I shared stories about my book club and Sunday school teaching. Then the conversation turned to my family. How is Edmund? Pearl asked. I remember him as a little boy. He was such a serious boy. He still is, I smiled. He works as a computer programmer and he's recently been promoted. He has a wonderful family, a wife and 2 children. I pulled my phone out of my purse and showed her a recent picture I'd taken at Calvin's birthday party. It showed Edmund, Meredith, the kids, and me all smiling, posing in front of a cake with candles. Pearl scrutinized the picture, and her gaze suddenly lingered on Meredith. Her expression changed, her eyebrows frowned, her lips tightened. Is something wrong? I asked, noticing her reaction. No, nothing, she answered quickly, but I could see it wasn't true. It's just, your sister-in-law reminds me of someone. Meredith? I was surprised. You couldn't have met, she's from Bridgeport. Pearl looked at the photograph again more closely. Maybe I'm wrong, she said uncertainly. The face looks familiar, but maybe she just looks like someone. We continued talking, but I noticed that Pearl sometimes became distracted, as if something was bothering her. When we were about to say goodbye, she suddenly asked, Violet, you said your sister-in-law is from Bridgeport. Did she grow up there? Yes, as far as I know. She and Edmund met here in Vienne, but she told me she grew up in Bridgeport. Why? Nothing much. Pearl shook her head. It just seemed to me. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm staying at my sister's for another week, so why don't we get together again? I said yes, and we parted. But the next day, Pearl called me herself. Violet, she sounded serious. We need to talk. It's about your sister-in-law. Can you come to my place tonight? I felt a chill run down my spine. Something in her tone made me wary. Of course, I answered. What's wrong? It's better to discuss it in person, she said. I'll see you at 3 o'clock. All day I couldn't find myself wondering what Pearl wanted to tell me about Meredith. At exactly 3 o'clock, I rang the doorbell of her sister's house, a small cottage on the outskirts of town. Pearl opened the door and ushered me into the living room. On the coffee table was an old newspaper, yellowed by time. Sit down, Violet, Pearl said, pointing to the couch. What I'm about to tell you may seem incredible, but I have proof. She sat down next to me and picked up a newspaper from the table. Your sister-in-law didn't grow up in Bridgeport, Violet, and her real name isn't Meredith Hall. I recognized her yesterday, though at first I couldn't remember where she came from. But it hit me in the night, and this morning I found it. She handed me the paper. It was the Bridgeport Courier from 15 years ago. Pearl opened it to page 3 and pointed to a small article in the bottom corner. The headline read, High Society Scandal. Prominent businessmen found involved with escort. I started reading the article but didn't realize what it had to do with Meredith until I got to the girl's name, Maddie Hayes. Next to the article was a fuzzy photo of a young woman leaving the courthouse, half covering her face with a bag. But even in that blurry picture, I recognized Meredith. The same hair, the same posture, the same features, though 15 years younger. That's impossible, I muttered, putting the paper aside. It must just be a girl who looks like her. That's what I thought at first. Pearl nodded. But then I made some calls. I've lived in Bridgeport for almost 30 years, and I know a lot of people there. And one of them, Agatha Finch, knew this Maddie Hayes well. They worked together. Worked as, escorts? I struggled to say the words. Yeah, Pearl looked me straight in the eye. Agatha said that Maddie was one of the most sought-after girls. She catered to rich clients, mostly businessmen and politicians. That scandal happened when the wife of one of them hired a private detective and caught them together. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Meredith, with her impeccable manners and social graces, was working as an escort? It seemed absurd. Maybe it was just a coincidence, I suggested. Maybe your friend is wrong. I thought so too, so I showed her your cell phone picture, the one you showed me yesterday. Agatha's pretty sure it's Maddie Hayes. She said Maddie had a special mark, a small mole behind her right ear, almost at the hairline. Your sister-in-law has a mole like that? I wondered. I'd never really looked at Meredith that closely, but something like that came to mind. At the last family dinner at their house, Meredith had her hair up in a high bun, and I'd actually noticed a mole behind her ear. I think so, I answered slowly. But it could still be a coincidence. Violet, Pearl sighed. I know this is hard for you to believe, but there's something else. Agatha told me that after that scandal, Maddie disappeared from Bridgeport. No one knew where she went. Then a few years later, Agatha happened to see her at a mall in a nearby town. She looked completely different, expensive clothes, different hair, like a high society lady. And she'd changed her name. She introduced herself as Melanie Holden. Meredith Hall, I whispered. It's very similar. Yeah, she must have a thing for M names, Pearl nodded. Agatha said that Maddie had always wanted to get out of that life, to find a rich husband and become part of high society. It looked like she'd succeeded. I sat there stunned by what I'd heard. The whole thing seemed crazy, like an evil joke, but something inside me told me it was true. It explained a lot of things, like why Meredith never invited her parents to family parties, why she spoke so little of her past, why she was always so eager to appear more refined and aristocratic than she really was. Pearl, I said at last, if all this is true, what am I to do with this information? I don't know, dear. She put her hand on my shoulder. I've been thinking for a long time about whether I should even tell you about it. But you're my friend, and I couldn't keep it from you. It's up to you. You can tell your son, you can talk to Meredith herself, or you can just forget about it. I can't just forget it, I shook my head. But to tell Edmund, it would destroy his family. They have children, Pearl, my grandchildren. I understand, she nodded. Maybe you should talk to Agatha. She might be able to tell you more. I agreed, and Pearl called her friend. 2 days later, I met Agatha Finch at the same cafe, the Morning Dew. She was a short woman in her 50s with short red hair and penetrating green eyes. Yes, that's definitely Maddie Hayes, she said, glancing at the picture of Meredith I'd shown her. I'd recognize her anywhere, though she's certainly changed. She looks like a real socialite now. Tell me about her, I asked. What was she like? Ambitious, Agatha answered without hesitation. Unlike most girls, Maddie didn't do drugs, hardly ever drank. She always said that this job was just a stepping stone to a better life. She was smart, studied her clients, memorized their tastes, habits, learned how to behave in society. And she was always looking for someone to lead her out of that life. And that scandal, I asked. What happened? Oh, it was a real drama. Agatha shook her head. Maddie had been dating James Weldon for almost a year. He was married, of course, but he promised her he would divorce and marry her. Classic story. His wife suspected something, hired a detective, and he filmed them together in a hotel. Mrs. Weldon made a public scandal, threatened to sue Maddie for destroying the family. James, of course, immediately disavowed Maddie, said she was stalking him, the usual story. And then what happened? I asked. Maddie disappeared. Agatha shrugged. I heard she moved to another state, and then, like I told Pearl, I ran into her at the mall. She pretended not to know me, but I recognized her. She was with some man, introduced him as her fiancé. Said her name was Melanie Holden and she worked in real estate. Was that my son? I asked quietly. I don't know, Agatha answered honestly. I hadn't really looked at him. He was a young man, well-dressed, successful-looking. Maddie always knew how to pick men with prospects. After that conversation, I came home in a complete state of confusion. For days, I couldn't eat or sleep properly, constantly thinking about what I had learned. Part of me wanted to tell Edmund everything immediately, to protect him from a woman who might have married him just for money and status. But the other part of me realized that it could ruin not only his marriage, but his life, not to mention his children. In the end, I decided to remain silent. Whatever Meredith's motives, she was the mother of my grandchildren and the wife of my son. If Edmund was happy with her, who was I to destroy that happiness? I tried to behave as usual when I met Meredith and Edmund, though now I noticed details I'd missed before. The way Meredith tensed slightly when talking about her past, the way she avoided mentioning her parents, the occasional odd accent that slipped into her speech, which she masked immediately. And now, standing in this luxurious restaurant under the stares of dozens of people, hearing Meredith call me a beggar and point me to the door, I realized that I could no longer remain silent. It wasn't just an insult, it was humiliation in front of all these people, in front of my son. Okay, I repeated, looking straight into Meredith's eyes. But everyone needs to know that you're not who you say you are. A shadow of concern flickered across Meredith's face, but she quickly pulled herself together. What are you talking about, Violet? She tried to grin, but I could see the fear in her eyes. I think the wine has gone to your head. No, Meredith. Or should I call you Maddie Hayes? I said loud enough for everyone to hear. I know about your past in Bridgeport, what you were doing before you met my son. Meredith's face turned pale. She looked around quickly, seeing that the guests were listening to our conversation with interest. Violet, you don't know what you're talking about. Her voice became quieter and more threatening. Stop it right now. Why? You don't want everyone to know that Meredith Hall, a successful realtor and socialite, was once an escort serving wealthy clients? That she was involved in a scandal with married businessman James Weldon? That she had changed her name and invented a new past to hide the truth? There was absolute silence in the room. All the guests froze, shifting their gazes from me to Meredith. Edmund stood beside me, his face a look of utter incomprehension and shock. Mother, he said in a hoarse voice. What are you saying? The truth, Edmund, I turned to my son. I learned it 3 months ago from my friend Pearl, who lived in Bridgeport. She recognized Meredith in our family photo. Your wife worked as an escort under the name Maddie Hayes until she got caught up in a scandal and skipped town. There are newspaper articles, witnesses. I kept quiet all this time for you and the kids, but today she crossed the line. Meredith looked like she was about to pass out. Her face was dead pale, her eyes wide with horror. It's a lie, she hissed. A dirty, filthy lie from a jealous old woman. Then explain why your parents never visit you, why you never talk about your childhood, why there are no pictures of you until you were 25? I turned to the guests. Meredith had spent years humiliating me, making me feel unworthy of being a part of their lives, all the while hiding the truth of who she really was. Edmund looked at his wife as if he were seeing her for the first time. Meredith, he said softly, is it true? She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, but couldn't say a word. And that reaction said more than any excuse. Out! She finally said, pointing a trembling finger at me. Get out! I won't let you ruin my life! You ruined it, Meredith, I said calmly, with your lies and your arrogance. I turned and headed for the exit. No one tried to stop me. As I passed the table where I was sitting, I picked up my purse and shawl. In absolute silence, I reached the door of the restaurant and stepped outside. The night air was cool and fresh after the stuffy hall. I inhaled deeply, feeling my knees shake. Only now did I realize what I'd done, exposing Meredith's secret to everyone, including Edmund's colleagues, possibly ruining their marriage, their social status, their lives. But a strange sense of bitter satisfaction overrode remorse. After so many years of humiliation and neglect, I had finally fought back. The price had been high, but Meredith had earned it by her treatment of me and the memory of my husband. I walked slowly down the street, not knowing where I was going or how I would get home. It was only now that I realized I'd come here with Edmund and didn't have a car. Taking out my cell phone, I called a cab. As I waited, I kept glancing at the restaurant door, expecting Edmund to come out, angry, shocked, demanding an explanation. But no one appeared. The cab arrived 10 minutes later. I called my address and leaned back in the seat, feeling tired. What would happen next, I didn't know. Maybe Edmund would never forgive me for what I'd done. Perhaps I would never see my grandchildren again. But in that moment, as I looked out the window at the lights of the city, I felt a strange release. The truth had finally come out and there was no more burden to live with. After that night at the restaurant, a week passed. 7 long days of silence. Edmund didn't call, didn't text, as if I no longer existed for him. Every night I looked at my phone hoping he'd contact me, but the screen remained dark. I tried to do the usual things, cooking, cleaning, going to book club, but my mind kept returning to that fateful dinner. I could see Meredith's pale face, Edmund's shocked look, the curious and judgmental glances of the guests. I did not regret what I had done, but the weight of losing my son and grandchildren grew more palpable with each passing day. On the 8th day, the silence was broken by a phone call. When I saw Edmund's name on the screen, I felt my heart jump to my throat. My hands shook as I picked up the phone. Hello? My voice sounded uncertain. Mom? Edmund's voice was cold and foreign. We need to talk. I'll be there in an hour. He hung up before I could say anything. This short conversation made me more nervous than all the days of silence. There was no warmth in his tone, only restrained anger. I began to prepare feverishly for his arrival, cleaned the living room, put the kettle on, took out the cookies he'd loved as a child. These simple acts helped to deal with the anxiety, to fill the interminably long hour of waiting. Exactly 1 hour later, the doorbell rang. Edmund stood on the doorstep, gaunt, with circles under his eyes, in a carelessly buttoned shirt. He looked as if he hadn't slept in days. Come in, I said, stepping aside. He walked into the living room without looking at me and sat down in the chair, the same one his father always sat in. I sank down on the couch opposite, folding my hands in my lap, waiting for him to start talking. Why did you do that? He finally asked, looking me straight in the eye. Why did you publicly humiliate my wife, shame our family in front of everyone? Edmund, I took a deep breath, trying to collect my thoughts. I didn't mean to embarrass you, but Meredith went too far. She humiliated me all evening, and then she called me a beggar and pointed at the door. I just couldn't take it. And that's why you decided to uncover some stupid story about her past? His voice was shaking with restrained anger. A story you didn't even bother to check out? I checked it out, Edmund, I said quietly. Very thoroughly, and it's true. Tell me everything, he demanded. How did you get this information? I started to tell him the meeting with Pearl, the photograph, the newspaper article, the conversation with Agatha. Edmund listened without interrupting, but his face grew more tense with every word I said. And you believe these women you don't even know? He asked when I was done. Believe some gossip from 15 years ago? Pearl is an old friend of mine, Edmund. She has no reason to lie. And there was a newspaper article, a photograph, a blurry picture of some girl who looked like Meredith. He raised his voice. You destroyed our family because of that? I didn't want to destroy your family, I objected. I kept quiet for 3 months for that very reason. But Meredith has always been good to you, he interrupted. She invited you to family parties, let you see her grandchildren, and you repaid her like this. I couldn't believe my ears. Did he really think Meredith was good to me? Had he not noticed all the little humiliations she'd subjected me to over the years? Edmund, I tried to say calmly, Meredith never treated me well. She put up with me only for your sake. She restricted my contact with my grandchildren, criticized everything I did, looked down on me, and she kept the truth about her past from you. Even if it is true, his voice grew quieter but no less angry. Who gave you the right to bring it out in public? Have you even thought about the children? How it will affect them when the school starts whispering about their mother? That hit the nail on the head. I really hadn't thought about my grandchildren the moment I revealed Meredith's secret. I was filled with resentment and anger, overshadowing everything else. I'm sorry about that, I said honestly. I hadn't meant to hurt Calvin and Olivia. But Meredith manipulated you all these years, Edmund. She didn't marry you out of love, but because you were her ticket to another life. She created a new identity, a new past. Enough! He stood up abruptly, clenching his fists. You know nothing about our marriage, about our relationship. Meredith loves me, always has, and I love her. What was in her past, if it's even true, doesn't matter. What matters is that she lied to you. I stood up too, looking him in the eye. That she built your life on a lie. And you ruined it out of revenge, he threw down. Do you know what happened after that dinner? Meredith sobbed all night. The kids didn't know what was going on. By the next day, everyone in Meredith's office knew the story. Her clients started backing out of deals. Her reputation was ruined. I felt a pang of guilt, but also a strange satisfaction. Meredith was finally getting what she deserved for years of lies and arrogance. It's the consequences of her own actions, Edmund, I said. Not mine. No, Mother. He shook his head. It's the consequences of your vindictiveness. And you know what? Meredith was right about you. You really are a petty, jealous woman who can't accept the success of others. His words hit harder than any physical slap. I recoiled, tears welling up in my eyes. "You don't understand," I whispered. "She never loved you the way I did. She used you." "No, you don't understand." His voice became hard. "Meredith is my wife, the mother of my children. Whatever she's done in the past, I accept her as she is now, and if you have to choose between her and me, choose. But know that in choosing against her, you choose against me." "Edmund, please." I reached out to him, but he pulled back. "Don't make me choose. I am your mother." "A real mother wouldn't do this," he said coldly. "A real mother would think of her son's happiness, not her own resentment." With those words, he headed for the door. I followed him, trying to stop him. "Edmund, wait! Let's talk calmly. I can explain." "There's nothing to explain." He turned around in the doorway. "You made your choice, and now you have to live with the consequences. Don't call me. Don't come to our house. And don't try to contact the kids." The door slammed shut behind him, leaving me in stunned silence. I sank slowly to the floor, unable to hold back my sobs. Edmund, my only son, had just cut me out of his life. I had only myself to blame. The next few days passed like a blur. I went about my daily business mechanically, but I felt empty inside. Several times I wanted to call Edmund, but each time I remembered his last words and put the phone away. The third day after we'd talked, I got a call from Pearl. "Violet?" Her voice sounded worried. "I heard what happened. Are you okay?" "Not really," I answered honestly. "Edmund won't talk to me. He sided with Meredith." "I'm so sorry," Pearl sighed. "I feel so guilty." "If I hadn't told you about her—" "Don't blame yourself," I interrupted her. "You acted like a true friend, and I just couldn't take it anymore and I went public. It was my mistake. You were protecting yourself, Violet. No one can blame you for that." Talking to Pearl made me feel a little better. At least there was one person in the world who understood me and didn't judge me. A week later, I got a call from Eleanor at the book club. She hadn't been at our last meeting, and I hoped the news hadn't gotten to her yet. But her first words shattered that hope. "Violet, darling, everyone in town is talking about what happened to your sister-in-law," she said. "Is it true that she used to work as a, you know?" "Eleanor, I don't want to discuss it," I replied tiredly. Of course," she agreed quickly, but continued after a moment. "It's just that I heard that her agency is losing clients. Jane, my neighbor was going to sell the house through her, but now she's changed her mind. She says she doesn't want to deal with a woman of that reputation." I closed my eyes, feeling conflicting emotions struggling inside. On the one hand, I was pleased that Meredith had finally faced the consequences of her lies. On the other, I ached to think of what it would do to my son and grandchildren. "Eleanor," I said firmly, "whatever Meredith has done, she is still my son's wife and the mother of my grandchildren. I'd rather people didn't spread those rumors." "Oh, of course," she agreed quickly again. "I just wanted you to know that everyone is on your side. No one blames you for revealing the truth." After that conversation, I decided to give up going to book club for a while. The thought of everyone discussing my family drama was unbearable. 2 weeks later, I ran into Meredith at the supermarket. I was picking out vegetables when I heard a familiar voice behind me and turned around. She was standing a few feet away from me, basket in hand, looking at me with such hatred that I involuntarily backed away. "Satisfied?" she asked quietly, stepping closer. "You ruined my career, my reputation. I hope it gave you satisfaction." "Meredith," I tried to remain calm. "I didn't mean to—" "Don't you dare say you didn't mean it," she hissed. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You hated me from the start." "That's not true," I countered. "I tried to get along with you, but you always looked down on me, kept me away from my son and my grandchildren. Because you were never good enough for them." Her eyes narrowed. "With your old-fashioned looks, your cheap clothes, your primitive talk, you were a hindrance to our social advancement." Her words confirmed everything I'd always suspected. Meredith truly thought me unworthy of being a part of their lives. Not because of anything I did, but simply because I wasn't rich and sophisticated enough for her taste. "You know what's ironic, Meredith?" I said. "You've been so desperate to be part of high society that you've forgotten the most important things: family, love, real values. You've traded sincerity for false glitter." It's not for you to tell me about values. She shook her head. Not after what you did. I exposed the truth. You're the one who's been living a lie for years. Now enjoy the results of your truth. Meredith turned to leave but stopped and added, by the way, Edmund has forbidden the children to see you. He thinks you're a bad influence on them. So forget about the grandchildren, Violet. You'll never see them again. With that, she walked away, leaving me standing there feeling like I'd been kicked in the butt. Being forbidden to see my grandchildren was the cruelest punishment Edmund could think of. Calvin and Olivia had been the light in my life since William's death, and the thought of no longer being able to hold them, to hear them laugh, to tell them bedtime stories, was unbearable. I dropped the shopping cart and hurried to the exit, feeling like I was about to cry in the middle of the store. As I got into the car, I let the tears flow. Was my outburst of anger, my moment of revenge, worth all this? Was it worth losing my son and grandchildren? At home, I sat in William's chair for a long time, looking at the family photos on the mantel. Edmund on graduation day, proud in his robe and cap. Calvin and Olivia last Christmas with shining eyes in front of the tree. William and I on our silver wedding day, as happy and in love as the first day. What would William say about what I did? Would he have approved of what I had done or condemned it? I could almost hear his voice. Violet, sometimes the truth isn't worth the pain it causes. But could I go on living a lie? Could I allow Meredith to continue to manipulate my son, to alienate him from me? I didn't know the answers to these questions. All I knew was that I had paid a huge price for a moment of celebration at the restaurant, and no matter what happened next, I would have to live with the consequences of my choices. It's been a month. I tried to get back to normal. I resumed book club meetings, started volunteering at the local library, even signed up for a gardening class. Anything to fill the void left by my separation from my son. But nothing could truly replace family. Every day I checked my phone, hoping to see a message or a missed call from Edmund. Every time the doorbell rang, I imagined for a moment that it was him coming to make up. But it always turned out to be the mailman or a neighbor or another salesman offering unwanted goods. One evening, as I was cooking dinner, the phone rang. An unfamiliar number. I answered it cautiously. Hello? Mrs. Price? A woman's voice asked. It was Lauren Campbell, Calvin's teacher. I felt my heart skip a beat. Has something happened to my grandson? Yeah, it's me. Did something happen to Calvin? No, he's fine. The teacher hurried to reassure me. I'm calling about something else. You see, the school has noticed that Calvin has been withdrawn and sad lately. When I talked to him, he told me about, your family's situation and how much he missed you. I put my hand over my mouth to hold back a sob. I miss him a lot too, I said in a shaky voice, but his parents forbid me to see him. I understand. Lauren's voice sounded sympathetic. I don't interfere in family matters, but as an educator, I'm concerned about the child's well-being. Calvin says you two were very close, and this sudden separation is traumatizing him. What can I do? I asked in desperation. Edmund won't return my calls, and Meredith, well, you've probably heard the story. Yes, the rumors have reached the school, Lauren sighed. Look, I talked to Mr. Price last week during parent-teacher conferences. He seemed depressed too. I think maybe he's not as adamant as he seems. Maybe we should write him a letter. Sometimes the written word penetrates deeper than the spoken word. After that conversation, I sat at my desk for a long time, pondering the teacher's words. A letter. Could it really be a way to reach my son? To express everything I felt without the risk of being interrupted or rejected right away? I pulled out paper and pen, old-fashioned, but I always thought better when I wrote by hand. Dear Edmund, I began, and the words flowed by themselves. I wrote of my love for him, of my regret for the pain I had caused, of how much I missed him and the children. I didn't make excuses, didn't insist that I was right, just opened my heart. When I finished the letter, I reread it, sealed it in an envelope, and put it on the table. I would send it tomorrow, I decided. Today I would pray that it would find its way to my son's heart. For the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe all was not lost. Maybe time and sincerity could heal the wounds we had inflicted on each other. I looked at William's picture on the dresser. I'm trying to make things right, darling, I whispered. I hope I succeed. Time is a strange thing. When you're happy, it rushes by at an incredible speed. But when your soul hurts, each day drags on endlessly. That's what happened to me after I broke up with Edmund. Every morning I woke up with a heavy weight on my heart. Every night I fell asleep with thoughts that I had lost the most precious thing, my family. It had been 3 months since I'd sent Edmund a letter. There was no reply. I tried calling a few more times, but he either dropped the call or didn't answer at all. Gradually, I came to terms with the idea that my son was not ready to forgive me. Maybe he never would be. Autumn changed to winter. The first snow fell and the world outside my window became white and quiet. I prepared for a lonely Christmas, the first in years without Edmund and the grandchildren. I bought a small Christmas tree, pulled out the old ornaments William and I had collected over the years. Each toy held a memory. This glass star we bought the year Edmund was born, and this teddy bear he picked out himself when he was 5. One such December day, as I was decorating the tree to quiet Christmas music, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting guests. My book club friends weren't going to be coming over until 3 days later, and no one else had stopped by my place. When I opened the door, I froze in surprise. Calvin, my grandson, stood on the doorstep with his backpack over his shoulders and his nose red from the cold. "Grandma," he said quietly, "can I come in?" I couldn't believe my eyes. He had grown and changed a little over the months, his features more defined, his eyes more serious. "He's 9 already," I thought with surprise. "Calvin?" I finally found my voice. "Sure, come in soon, you're freezing." The boy slipped into the house, and I closed the door behind him, still in disbelief. "Does Daddy know you're here?" I asked, helping him take off his jacket. Calvin lowered his eyes. "Ilain, I told him I was going to my friend Brian's house after school, but I really wanted to see you, Grandma." My heart squeezed. As happy as I was to see my grandson, the thought that he'd tricked his father into coming to see me secretly worried me. "Sit down, dear." I pointed to the couch. "I'll make some hot chocolate and you can tell me what's going on." As I prepared the drink in the kitchen, my mind was spinning with anxious thoughts. What if Edmund finds out? What if he thought I'd encouraged Calvin to come? That could make our breakup even worse. Returning to the living room with 2 steaming mugs, I sat down next to my grandson. He seemed unusually quiet and thoughtful for his age. "I've missed you, Grandma," he said, wrapping his arms around the mug. "And your stories, and the cookies you always baked for us." "I missed you too, sweetheart," I replied, fighting the lump in my throat. "And Olivia. How is she?" "She's fine," he shrugged. "She's just a little girl. She doesn't understand everything. But at home." He stopped, as if hesitant to continue. "What at home?" I asked softly, though I knew I was about to hear something unpleasant. "It's bad at home," Calvin blurted out. "Dad and Mom fight all the time. Daddy sleeps in the guest room a lot. And yesterday?" He hesitated, but then he went on with determination. "Yesterday, Dad told Mom he wanted a divorce." I froze, not knowing what to say. Part of me felt grim satisfaction that Edmund had finally had an epiphany and seen Meredith's true face. But the other part of me, the motherly part, ached for my son, who was going through such an ordeal. "I'm sorry to hear that, Calvin," I said sincerely. "It's always hard for kids when their parents split up." "It's not just what you said about Mom, Grandma," Calvin continued, looking into his mug. "Though Dad was really mad about it at first. But then he started checking things out, asking people. And a month ago, he found messages from some James on Mom's phone. James. I remembered talking to Agatha. James Weldon was the married businessman that Meredith had a scandal with in the past. Had she contacted him again? What were those messages? I asked cautiously, not wanting to push the kid into talking about things he shouldn't know. "I don't know exactly," Calvin frowned. "All I heard was Dad yelling at Mom, saying something about cheating and betrayal. And Mom yelling back that he never gave her what she needed. It was scary, Grandma. Olivia was crying, and I took her into my room so she couldn't hear. My heart broke at the thought of children going through that nightmare. Edmund and Meredith engrossed in their squabbles, didn't seem to notice the pain they were inflicting on the most vulnerable members of the family. And then Dad found some bills, Calvin continued. Mom was spending a lot of money, and Dad didn't know what it was for. He was very angry. It was all adding up to an ugly picture. It looked like Meredith was not only cheating on Edmund, but spending the family money on her secret life. After that, Mom went away a lot. She said it was for work, but she'd come back late and smelled strange. Calvin wrinkled his nose. And then yesterday, when Dad said the divorce, she was screaming and crying at first, and then suddenly she was very calm and said she was going to take Olivia and me and move so far away that he'd never find us. I went cold at those words. Meredith could do something stupid in desperation, and my grandchildren would be in danger. Calvin, does your dad know about this threat? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm so I wouldn't scare the boy more. Yes, he nodded. He said he wouldn't let her do it. And this morning, when I left for school, he was on the phone with some lawyer. At least Edmund recognized the seriousness of the situation and was taking action. That was a little comforting. Grandma? Calvin looked up at me with eyes full of concern. Daddy's been very sad lately. He tries to smile when he sees me and Olivia, but I can tell he's not happy. He even cried once when he thought I was asleep. And also, he's been looking at your letter. He reread it many times. So Edmund had gotten my letter after all, and read it. That gave me hope. Papa needs help, Grandmother, Calvin continued. I heard him telling his friend Uncle Rick that he was wrong about you, that you tried to warn him and he wouldn't listen, but he was too proud to call you first. I sat stunned by my grandson's revelations. Did Edmund admit I was right? Did he regret our quarrel? It was more than I dared hope. I came to ask you to help him. Calvin took my hand. Please, Grandmother. You always said family was the most important thing. Help Daddy. He can't handle Mom alone. My decision was immediate and firm. Of course I'll help my son. Despite everything that had happened between us, he was still my child, my flesh and blood. And he needed me now, even if he couldn't admit it to himself. I'll help Calvin, I promised. But first we need to call your dad. He must be worried sick if he doesn't know where you are. The boy nodded guiltily. I pulled out my phone and dialed Edmund's number, praying that he would answer. To my surprise, he picked up almost immediately. Hello? His voice sounded strained. Edmund, it's Mom, I said, trying to sound calm. Don't worry, I have Calvin. He's fine. There was a short pause and then, You have him? What's he doing there? He came by after school, said he wanted to see me. Yeah. Edmund hesitated. I'll come and get him. Of course, I answered. We'll be waiting. As I hung up, I looked at Calvin. He looked scared and hopeful at the same time. Is Dad mad? He asked quietly. I think he was just worried about you. I stroked his head. He'll be here soon. In the meantime, why don't you help me decorate the tree? I was just doing it when you got here. We spent the next hour hanging the decorations on the tree. I told Calvin stories about each ornament, when and where we bought it, what events were connected with it. The boy listened with interest, at times asking questions about his father as a child. These were precious moments that I had been deprived of for so long. When the doorbell rang, we both flinched. I went to open it, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. For the first time in many months, I would see my son. Edmund stood on the doorstep, gaunt with dark circles under his eyes, wearing a carelessly buttoned coat. He looked as if he hadn't slept for several nights in a row. Mother, he said quietly, and there was so much in that one word: tiredness, confusion, uncertainty. Come in, Edmund. I stepped aside. It's cold outside. He walked into the hallway and took off his coat. Calvin looked out of the living room, and when he saw his father, he lowered his head guiltily. I'm sorry, Dad, he said. I just really wanted to see Grandma. To my surprise, Edmund didn't scold his son. He just walked over and hugged him tightly. I understand, he said. But next time, warn me, okay? I was worried. Okay, Calvin nodded. I can finish decorating the tree with Grandma while you two talk? Edmund looked at me, as if asking for permission. Sure, I said. Your father and I will have tea in the kitchen. We sat at the kitchen table, just as we had in the old days, when Edmund used to come to me with his teenage problems. Only now he was a grown man facing the collapse of his family life. Calvin told me that you and Meredith are having problems. I began cautiously. Edmund sighed and wrapped his hands around the mug, as if trying to warm himself with its warmth. That's putting it mildly, he said. It's worse than I could have imagined. Do you want to tell me? He was silent for a moment, staring off into space, and then, as if a dam had burst, "You were right, Mom. You were right about everything. Meredith isn't who she says she is. After that night at the restaurant, I was furious with you, with her, with the world. At first, I didn't want to believe what you said. I defended her, convinced myself it was all a lie or an exaggeration." He took a sip of tea and continued. "But then I started to notice strange things. Meredith became nervous, irritable. One day I overheard her talking on the phone to someone, using a completely different intonation, a different manner of speech, more coarse with an accent that she usually hides carefully. When she noticed me, she instantly changed her voice and quickly ended the conversation. It sounded like a classic case of a double life. One identity for the public and family, the other, carefully concealed, for other connections. I've started following her." Edmund shook his head. "I never thought I'd be spying on my own wife. Checked her cell phone when she was asleep, looked at her bills, even hired a private investigator." "And what did you find?" I asked quietly. "She was seeing men. Various men." His voice trembled. "The detective provided photographs, records. One of them was James Weldon, the businessman from her past. He divorced his wife and moved to our town about a year ago. Apparently, they'd rekindled their relationship. I remembered the name Agatha had mentioned. History was repeating itself. Meredith had reconnected with the same man who had once caused the scandal. But that's not all," Edmund continued. "She was spending huge sums of money from our accounts, tens of thousands of dollars every month. At first, I thought it was for clothes, jewelry, beauty salons. She always loved luxury. But it turned out that the money went to pay for an apartment in the center of the city, which I did not know about. That's where she met her clients." "Clients?" I asked, feeling my back grow cold. "You mean—" "Yes," he nodded. "She was back to her old profession. Only now she had wealthier clients and higher rates. She used our social status, my business connections, to find rich men willing to pay for her services." I closed my eyes, trying to comprehend what I had heard. It was even worse than I'd realized. Meredith wasn't just hiding her past. She was continuing to lead a double life while married to my son. "Edmund, I'm so sorry," I said, reaching across the table and squeezing his palm. "Do you know what the worst part is?" He looked into my eyes. "Not the cheating, not the lies. It was that I started to wonder if she'd ever loved me at all, if I was more than just a convenient cover for her, a source of money and status." "I'm sure she loved you in her own way," I said, though I didn't believe it myself. "At least in the beginning." "Maybe," he shrugged. "But that's not enough, is it? Love isn't just a feeling, it's also a choice we make every day. The choice to be honest, to be faithful, to care for another more than ourselves. She never made that choice. I looked at my son with pride and pain. He had matured, grown wiser through this ordeal, but at what cost? "What are you going to do now?" I asked. "Divorce," he answered firmly. "I've already filed the papers. Meredith is furious. She's threatening to take the kids, but I have proof of her double life. No court is going to give the children to a woman who's doing this. Calvin said she threatened to take them away." "Yes," Edmund's face darkened. "I took action. Took their passports temporarily, warned the school that no one but me could take the children. But I'm still afraid. Meredith is unpredictable, especially now that she has nothing to lose." "You could move in with the kids," I suggested. "There's plenty of room, and Meredith won't come looking for them." Edmund looked at me gratefully. "Thank you, Mother. I'll think about it." He was silent for a moment, then added, "I'm sorry I didn't believe you then. You tried to warn me, and I pushed you away, blamed you for destroying my family. But the truth is, Meredith destroyed my family with her lies and betrayal. You couldn't have known." I squeezed his hand. "Love sometimes blinds us, makes us see only what we want to see." "I missed you, Mom," he said quietly. "And the children missed him too, especially Calvin. He asked about you all the time. I missed you too, I replied, feeling tears come to my eyes. Every day. We sat like that for a while, just holding hands, enjoying a reunion that had seemed impossible just a few hours ago. Then Calvin's voice came from the living room. Grandma, Dad, come see how beautiful it turned out. We looked at each other and smiled, the first real smile Edmund had seen all evening. Come on, he said, standing up. Let's not keep him waiting. Calvin had put up all the toys and lights, and the room was filled with a warm, twinkling light. Do you like it? The boy asked proudly. Very much, Edmund replied, putting his arm around his son's shoulders. You did a great job. Grandma, Calvin turned to me, you're going to help Daddy, aren't you? And Olivia and me too? Mom's been weird lately. I'm afraid of her sometimes. Edmund flinched at those words, and I realized how much it hurt him to hear that his children were afraid of their mother. Of course I'll help, I said firmly. We'll all get through this together as a family. Thank you, Grandma. Calvin ran up and hugged me tightly. I knew you wouldn't say no. When it was time to leave, Edmund lingered in the doorway. Mom, I've been thinking about your offer, about moving here. It really would be the best solution, at least for the duration of the divorce proceedings. Meredith doesn't know where you live now. We moved after your last visit. Come back anytime, I said. I'll have the rooms ready for you and the children. Thank you. He leaned over and kissed me on the cheek. For everything. Forgive me for what I said the other day. I was wrong. You're already forgiven, I replied. You're my son, and I'll always love you no matter what. After they left, I sat in the living room for a long time, looking at the glowing lights on the Christmas tree. My heart was full of conflicting feelings: joy at being reunited with my son and grandson, bitterness at what Edmund had gone through, anxiety about the future, and wariness toward Meredith, who could be dangerous in her despair. But a sense of determination prevailed. I will protect my family, my grandchildren from this woman who has brought so much pain. I will never forgive Meredith for what she did to my son, for her lies and betrayal. And I will never let her back into our lives, even if she tries. Looking at the pictures on the mantel, Edmund, Calvin, Olivia, the late William, I thought about how amazingly life works. Sometimes the most painful truths, the hardest trials lead to liberation, to the opportunity to start anew. The truth, no matter how bitter, shatters the illusions that hold us captive. My son was finally free from the lies he had lived in for years. He had a difficult time ahead of him: divorce proceedings, children adjusting to a new life, healing from betrayal. But now he had me, his mother, ready to support and help no matter what happened. And I had a second chance. A chance to be a part of my son's and grandchildren's lives again. A chance to create a new family from the shards of the old one. Not a perfect one, with scars and memories of pain, but a real one, based on love and truth. Sometimes you have to lose something precious to realize its true worth. Sometimes you have to walk through darkness to see the light. And sometimes the hardest trials lead to the most important discoveries about ourselves, about others, about what really matters in this life.